Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Well, today, the Ukrainian lines, the line of contact between Russian forces and Ukrainian forces continues to deteriorate for Ukrainian forces. Russian forces continue its methodical push westward as it continues to degrade and destroy the Ukrainian military. Now, because of what is happening on the ground with the recent defeat of the Ukrainian last summer counteroffensive and the continued success of the Russian military, and not only battlefield success, but the ability of the Russian Federation to mobilize its military industrial capacity and its ability to enlarge its armed forces has the globalists, the neoliberal globalists, in charge of Western Europe and, for most part, the United States, fearing a complete and total defeat in Ukraine. And that is why we are seeing the French government, led by Macron, a devout neoliberal globalist, preparing his country for the prospects of war. The idea is that the French military would essentially initiate hostilities against the Russian Federation by deploying its forces into Western Ukraine, thereby soliciting a response from Russian forces against those French forces. Now, what will the French be able to do against Russia? Well, the French have a very capable Air Force. It's not very big. They can field about 100 plus of these very advanced Rafale multi-role combat aircraft. They have some very advanced precision-guided weapon systems, very advanced targeting pods, optics, necessary to fight a low-intensity war. The French military is not designed right now to fight the kind of war that we're seeing in the Ukraine. Now, would the French cause problems for the Russians? Yes, they would. The French Air Force initially would probably be fairly effective against Russian forces. Initially. But the problem for the French is as the war continues, much of this equipment would start to wear out, it would be destroyed, and the French Air Force, probably within 6 months of the conflict starting, would be a shell of its former self. It would be degraded immensely by the Russian Air Force, and then obviously, more importantly, the Russian air defense network, the S-400s, S-300s, and other systems that would degrade this French capability. And again, the French Air Force is the star of the French military. Now, it does have about 200 operational Leclerc main battle tanks. Not a lot, considering the Russians have thousands. You're looking at what would amount to is one understrength armored division that the French are able to deploy. Now, the French could ramp up production. They could try and take out of mothball some of these Leclerc main battle tanks and push them into service. But again, at the end of the day, the French military is not designed for the kind of war that we are currently seeing in Ukraine. And the French introduction of its forces into Western Ukraine, they would not be designed to fight the Russian military by itself. The real strategy would be, with the introduction of French forces into Western Ukraine, would be to draw in other Western nation states to also fight Russia in what would become the Third World War. Now, I have to ask, in France, are the French people ready to sacrifice their sons, some of their daughters, at the altar of Macron's neoliberal globalist ideology? And it is an ideology. It is an ideology based on climate change theocracy, the economic benefits of some of those companies that have invested themselves into climate change theocracy, sexual nationalism, and we can see that in Macron's own household, among other things. I have to tell you, the French could be on the precipice of seeing its civilization, its culture, completely collapse. A war with Russia, compounded by the unbridled immigration of peoples other than French into French society, will probably destroy the country at some point. France, prior to today and going back 200 years, going forward, will not look like that France. And especially if we enter into this Third World War that is rapidly approaching. Again, we're getting closer, not further away. What is happening right now in terms of global military conflicts, the high-intensity war in Ukraine, the continued pressures and stressors between the United States, Western Europe, and Russia, China, Iran, eventually is going to explode. And we're getting there very quickly. But the neoliberal Macron is absolutely leading his country towards war. That is where he is heading. And I believe it is the hope of Macron that, and his neoliberal controllers, that it is the hope that with the French introduction of forces into Western Ukraine, it will cause a cascading effect with other nation states also introducing forces into Ukraine, again, thus entering a new world war. So as we continue to watch the front lines collapse of Ukrainian forces, and we continue to hear about mass Russian offensives in the hundreds of thousands of troops, that is where this is heading. Absolutely. So more to come. We're watching the front lines very closely. We're watching other factors as well, to including France and what they do. in the coming days and weeks. And as always, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.